Welcome to Celebrity Interviews with Paul. I have with me today Pastor Manisha Dostert. Manisha is, and let me make sure, she is the Senior Associate Rector at Church Cranbrook. Manisha is an ELCA pastor serving an Episcopal congregation and a dear friend. Welcome to Celebrity Interviews, Manisha.
This is just so much fun. And of course, I expect nothing less from you, Paul.
Thank you. Thank you. So how is life in the pandemic for you and your family?
Oh, it's well, I think over and over again, I thank God I love Jesus and and I got a rock, but we're doing all right. We may have had the COVID. It was hard to tell, but we were down for the count in
Okay.
March and April. But
Every time someone says the COVID, I want to hear like a really strong, like Brooklyn accent. He had the COVID, you know.
I, I know,
I know we're
I
not
know,
supposed
but
to do accents anymore, but I always like in my head here, like, you know.
I do too. A
Well,
good Jewish mama.
yeah,
Yeah.
it reminds me of being in Churchville, Virginia, where nobody had diabetes, but some people had the sugar.
Ah, that's adorable. I
Yeah.
love that.
Well,
I'm all,
Manisha and I, we met 10 years ago, we realized, almost to the day, well, 9 years and 11 months ago or so, when I first arrived in Michigan to serve as pastor at Lutheran Church of the Master. And what endeared me to Manisha was I was at a conference meeting and said, does anybody like to read books and talk about them? And Manisha said, I do. She was really cheery about stuff, which was, I wasn't sure about that aspect of her, but
you were annoyed with it.
I was a little annoyed. But then I got to know her, and she's a person I dearly love and highly respect. And so we're here to talk about race today. Um, Manisha, when I met her, I just thought she had an interesting name and black hair and maybe tanned quickly. I have a wife that doesn't have as interesting a name, but she has black hair and tans quickly. So I didn't think anything of it. It may have been like a year before I realized that Manisha's parents were immigrants from India, which kind of informed a little bit about who she was, and also kind of helps to inform our conversation because Manisha comes into this as a person of color as well. Um, so, you want to?
Yeah, absolutely. My parents immigrated from India in 1963 and settled in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. My dad was a civil engineer and worked on bridges. So I'm what's usually called second generation. I was born and raised in the States, um, and we were strong Indian household, and more importantly, we also practiced faith from India called Jainism. And so that made me a minority in many aspects in a very kind of white suburb in Pittsburgh.
Yeah. Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, probably not a hotbed of Indian immigration.
No, no, and eventually we did end up in Pittsburgh, and a lot more Indians there. In
Mhm.
fact, I think one of the first Hindu temples was built in Pittsburgh in the 70s. So that was a big thing.
I bet.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
bet. Excellent. Well, as I think about the in the midst of the COVID pandemic, we had this huge Black Lives Matter uprising in response to the death of George Floyd and the horrific video around that. And honestly, in some ways I'm not terribly surprised because since March, I think the entire country, we've all been on edge. We've been anxious. We've been afraid for our health, for the health of the people we love. Our lives have been turned upside down, whether you're an essential worker still doing your job or you're sheltering in place. And even as we start to open up, nothing is the same. So there's all this kind of anxiety just there. And then, you have this graphic video and a realization and reminder about the injustices going on. And in some way, and obviously, in a lot of ways, that's kind of a gift. Horrific, but a gift because it reminds us of the things going on in the world.
Yeah, Trevor Noah did a nice piece on sort of why the pandemic and the vision of what happened to George Floyd seemed to be so deeply connected, along with what happened to Christian Cooper and Amy Cooper.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I think there's a lot of truth to that because of a pandemic, each one of us actually had nowhere to go except to watch um, the terror and the murder of George Floyd. I also think um, that there's something about the the Black Lives Matter movement that spoke to us in a way that is a little reminiscent of the civil rights movement, and yet to me is very different. And I've been thinking, just like many other people, about this. And I was very grateful to hear from Angela Dillard, who is a historian at University of Michigan. She was on a webinar that we did at Christ Church Cranbrook, and she was talking about the origin of Black Lives Matter, and just even that slogan, Black Lives Matter. It is a statement that screams out to us about our humanity.
Hmm.
It has very little to do with power. It has nothing to do really with, you know, the structures of injustice. It's saying, you know, Black lives
Yeah.
matter, and it's almost a cry for us to remember who we are as human beings, connected, deeply connected with one another, um, not only connected but dependent and codependent on each other as human beings, as we found out through a public health crisis.
Right.
Right?
Right. Yeah, because it spreads from person to person to person, and yet, and I guess that's part of the I think the insidious nature, though, of the way racism and not just, our own personal experiences with racism, or our or the ways that we kind of internalize some of that stuff, but also then the systemic things that go on. For a long time we were able to say, well, that, if I'm living comfortably in here, it doesn't really touch me. If I'm living comfortably in this space, then what difference does that make? And I think that the Black Lives Matter movement and the cries were a reminder that we are all connected, and that it does impact each of us. And of course, as people of faith, we're not supposed to only care for ourselves. We're supposed to worry about the rest of the world, right? Peace and justice for all, not just some. And all isn't just like my friends. So the challenge, though, I think in both of our contexts, we serve in congregations which are relatively middle class, upper middle class, predominantly Caucasian. Um, what do we do with these kinds of movements and these kind of conversations? And how do we respond to this world then, as we see it now?
Yeah, I mean, I think those are really great and heavy questions. And and you and I have talked a little bit about this before too. I, you know, I guess I have a couple of thoughts about white churches, and how are white churches called to be in, especially right now. So what I've realized is that there is a group or a kind of a theory that if you didn't know before, shame on you.
Hmm.
Um, and I'm not sure that there's anything actually Christian about that. In fact, Christians are really great about confession
Hmm.
and repentance
Right.
and being able to say, we didn't know.
Hmm.
So I actually find that a very important Christian stance.
So the
Um,
first, so the first stance is to say that, wow, this is new information to me, um, and
yeah, or I didn't know how bad it was,
right,
or I mean, I knew there was problems, but I didn't quite get it until I saw that awful video, and that did something to me.
right.
Um, it gave me the portal into which I realized just how horrible
Well, and
this is.
I think some of the power in that video was how kind of non-violent it was in a way. It wasn't a video of a vicious beating. It was just a guy kneeling there that went on and on and on, and you kind of knew what was going on, but I think that actually added to the horror of it in a way, ironically. Um,
Yeah. I mean, I have been very I it was just a video, and it was a man being murdered in front of our eyes, and it has some sort of kind of, to me, supernatural um, power, for lack of a better word. I mean, and I have wondered if this isn't like the 21st century vision of a crucifixion.
Mm.
Um, and that means that this is going to be bigger than what it is. And I think people have scholars better than me have figured all that stuff out. But what I what I'm really amazed at is how it's given a lot of people, whites especially, this beautiful opportunity to say, I didn't know,
Yeah.
and I want to know more, and I don't know how to be, and I need some help.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is the the privilege of having your eyes open.
Mm-hmm. So maybe the first step is to learn more. So, and we do that by talking to people. We don't learn that by reading. We learn that by reading books and having conversations around that. So that's a beginning. In terms of what you said about like the video and the power of it and the supernatural power over it, it is amazing too that the Black Lives Matter movement suddenly was not a United States thing, um, and it reinvigorated justice movements for people of African descent in France in particular. Really like restarted things. So it has that. So we learn, we educate ourselves. That's part of it. Figure out and we listen. We listen to the stories of people, and we just take that in, and we take it at face value and trust the authenticity of their story.
Yeah, I think there's education obviously involved when you don't know something. I mean, Christians are disciples. We are used to the idea that there's still stuff to learn in our faith, and God will reveal things. So that's pretty natural. But I think the second step is just as vital, and there has to be a second step. This is what you said. As Christians, we're called to care for one another. So the second step to me is that initial vulnerability that we all experienced um, with George Floyd's death means that we can have a vulnerability in entering into new relationships, and those are the hardest because they never go as planned. you know so
Right.
so you're like, okay, I'm a white person, and I need to learn more, and I need to experience more, and I'm going to call up a person who I know is black, and you have a conversation, and let's say you figure out how to get some coffee and start to be
Mhm.
into each other's lives, and at some point all of you are going to be disillusioned
Yeah.
because the truth is complicated, it's sophisticated, it's difficult,
Mhm.
and that's what good relationships do. They mature through those pieces. So that is a long process. That's not something that's going to be done overnight. That is something that you dedicate yourself to, and I think that's why the church is so wonderfully poised for this kind of work. We know how to do long-term work.
Right. 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 Well, and I think you can even you can even enter into some of this. Yeah, part of it is making connections with people, but also in my neighborhood, the vast majority of the homes that are being sold are being purchased by Indian families. And I've got like there's like this wonderful gaggle of young like late elementary boys riding bikes all over the neighborhood. All of them whose parents are of Indian descent. And I saw one of the moms the other day. She's out walking, and I just said, I just love seeing the kids ride around on their bikes. It's great. You know, because
So
it makes me
so
happy. You know.
Yes, yeah. And I would just offer this, that in the States where there's a legacy and a history of of um, of racial strife and racism and racial discrimination and racial terrorism between blacks and whites. Um, we who are non-black and non-white, um, we have a unique relationship in this space.
Mhm.
And then I would even go far as so far as to say that if you are not Latinx or Hispanic or Latino or Latina, um, you also have a different experience in this space. So as an I talked to my sister, and you know, Paul, I think it it took you a while to figure out I was Indian, and you're not
Right.
alone.
Right.
I don't present as an Indian person. I have light skin.
Hmm.
I don't have some of the natural kind of Indian characteristics. My sister, who's a little bit darker, who does have some of those. Um, so there's really no question that she's Indian. When she and I talk about being brown,
Hmm.
she doesn't call herself brown.
Hmm.
And so she considers herself Asian Indian, which
Okay.
so I think this group of people, of which many people know Indians, many people know people who are from Asia, China, Japan, Philippines, South Korea, North Korea, etc.
Hmm.
Um, this group of people have a unique relationship among the Black and white population, and it is an interesting thing because we actually can be in both groups
Hmm. Yeah.
in a way that is a privilege.
Hmm.
And I do believe that this might be also true of Latinx, but it's certainly true of people who are from the Indian subcontinent.
Well, the other reality too is as we see immigrants come, immigrants tend to be highly motivated, highly functioning people. They come and they got a plan, and they're gonna like set down roots, and they're gonna like take care of their family, and they're gonna like, and so there is this kind of inherent advantage to being an immigrant. Um,
Sure, sure, yeah. Which
Lazy,
wasn't
lazy,
always the case for
sure,
some groups, like if you're of Japanese descent or Chinese descent.
right, right, right. Um, but it does kind of shift some of those realities, and um, yeah.
Yeah, but all of that is to say that a person who is not white and not black has a role and a responsibility that's unique. And here's how it has been playing out in my life, or how I see it, which is which is I spend most of my time in the white world,
Hmm.
um, and I spend it as a person who's not white. And one of the things I hear the most is things. The most common thing that's said to me by a white person is, "Well, I don't think of you as having color,"
Hmm. Hmm.
and I know that's meant as like you're as close to me as I can be.
Mm.
Um, um, and the gift of being different is a gift from God.
Hmm.
So 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 that's the one piece. But then from a black community, the gift of being a brown person is some of the pain.
Hmm.
Um, I've experienced discrimination. My whole family has. We've been told to go back to where we came from, and
Sure.
so on. So all that's real. And
Yeah. Which as a person of Norwegian and German descent, I've never been told to go back where I came from. Those are not, and that's part of my privilege, of who I am, and that's the other educational piece. I think it's one on the one hand we have to educate ourselves about like the difficulties and struggle of people of color. On the other hand, for me, I also need to educate myself about and acknowledge the realities of the privilege that I bring to the table, and that I've experienced throughout my life. Um, and then see how those things can be used for good.
right, right. I think as a white person, those are some of your gifts and graces and things that you get to do and your duties and delights. Um, I also though think that being a person of color, there are many gifts and roles that we bring to the table that don't have to wait for the acknowledgement or the power of a structure that may not be hearing it. And I take that from Jesus. Jesus didn't really care if anybody didn't listen. Jesus found a place at the table because it was his table.
Right, right. And he kept making it bigger.
Yeah,
Kept
love that.
finding, kept finding new people to bring to the table. Well, Manisha, thank you for your time today. You are
Sure.
a gift. You are a dear friend, and I treasure our friendship. And I am the thing that grieves me the most is how infrequently we get to sit down over a meal and be together. And it's even worse now because, but it's great to see your face and be able to talk a little bit around these things. My last question for you today is, where do you find joy?
Well, certainly in my 10 years with you, Paul, I would you you always keep me on my toes, and and it's never a dull moment with you, my friend.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Well, blessings to you, Manisha. Thank you for being here on Celebrity Interviews with Paul. Have a joyful day.
You too. Peace. Bye.